A wildlife photographer risked everything to free a gray wolf trapped in barbed wire. Everyone told him to stay away. But what the pack did in the months that followed defied everything we know about these mysterious predators. This is a story of compassion, instinct, and an unspoken pact between man and wilderness that will make you question everything you thought you knew about wild animals. Get ready for an extraordinary journey that reveals nature's most profound secrets. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The late autumn wind cut through Daniel Reed's jacket as he hiked along the northern boundary of Yellowstone National Park. At 36, Daniel had spent over a decade as a wildlife photographer, specializing in capturing images of North America's most elusive predators. The gray wolf was his particular passion, and the reason he'd moved to a remote cabin in Montana 3 years ago. This November morning had begun like countless others. A pre-dawn start, camera gear carefully packed, and a meandering route planned through terrain where wolf sightings had recently been reported. The Aspen Creek Pack, according to park rangers, had been hunting in this region for the past week. The first 5 hours yielded nothing beyond spectacular landscapes and a few distant elk. Daniel was considering turning back when he heard it, a sound that stopped him mid-stride. A high-pitched whine followed by a desperate snarling, something in distress and close by. Following the sounds, Daniel crested a small ridge and immediately dropped to a crouch. In the shallow valley below, not 60 yards away, lay a large gray wolf caught in what appeared to be an illegal snare of barbed wire. The animal's hind leg was entangled in the cruel metal, blood staining its silver-gray fur. Each time the wolf struggled, the barbs dug deeper into its flesh. "Damn poachers," Daniel muttered, reaching for his satellite phone to call the park rangers, but something made him pause. The wolf's amber eyes had locked onto his, and in them, Daniel saw not the feral rage he expected, but something that struck him as eerily recognizable. Pain, and perhaps something more complex. As a wildlife photographer, Daniel had been trained never to interfere with nature. Intervention, his mentors had drilled into him, disrupted natural processes and could do more harm than good. The proper protocol was clear. Call the authorities and document the situation from a safe distance. Yet, as he dialed the ranger station, Daniel learned that the nearest response team was at least 3 hours away, dealing with a tourist emergency on the other side of the park. "Can you maintain visual and provide updates?" the ranger asked. "Do not approach the animal under any circumstances. A wounded wolf is among the most dangerous encounters possible." "Understood," Daniel replied. But as he ended the call, his eyes remained fixed on the struggling predator. The wolf had stopped fighting against the wire and now lay panting, occasionally licking at its wound. It was a magnificent specimen. A male, Daniel guessed, at least 5 years old based on its size and the silvering around its muzzle. Likely an alpha or high-ranking pack member. What happened next defied all of Daniel's training and instincts. The wolf raised its head again, meeting Daniel's gaze with an intensity that seemed to transcend the natural barrier between human and wild. Then it did something extraordinary. It lowered its head to the ground in a posture that struck Daniel as submissive, a gesture utterly at odds with everything he knew about wolf behavior toward humans. "This is insane," Daniel whispered to himself as he began slowly descending the ridge, his camera forgotten on its strap. Every wildlife expert would condemn what he was considering. A wolf in pain was unpredictable, capable of inflicting devastating injuries. Yet something about this situation felt different, as if the usual rules had been temporarily suspended. As Daniel approached, moving in a wide arc to remain in the wolf's line of sight, he spoke in low, even tones, not because he believed the animal could understand his words, but because the human voice might prevent the wolf from perceiving him as a stalking predator. "I'm going to try to help you," he said steadily, "but you've got to work with me here." The wolf tracked his approach with intelligent eyes, but made no aggressive moves. At 20 feet away, Daniel removed his heavy jacket preparing to use it as a potential shield. At 15 feet, he unsheathed his hunting knife, its blade glinting in the autumn sunlight. At 10 feet, close enough to see the rise and fall of the wolf's ribcage with each labored breath, Daniel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Daniel's heart pounded as he edged closer to the trapped wolf. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to wait for the rangers, to follow protocol. The wolf's amber eyes never left him, its body unnaturally still, except for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. "Easy now," Daniel whispered, crouching slowly 5 feet from the massive predator. "I'm going to cut you free." From this distance, he could see the wolf's predicament more clearly. The barbed wire, clearly set illegally, had wrapped around the animal's hind leg multiple times, with cruel barbs embedded in the flesh. Blood matted the thick fur, but the bleeding had mostly stopped, suggesting the wolf had been trapped for hours. Daniel spread his jacket on the ground beside him and carefully removed a pair of wire cutters from his backpack. He always carried them for emergencies in the backcountry, though he'd never imagined using them for something like this. "This might hurt," he said, inching forward on his knees. The wolf's ears flattened against its head, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. Daniel froze, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then, remarkably, the wolf ceased growling and instead made a soft whining sound, its head lowering slightly. Taking this as permission, Daniel moved closer until he was within arm's reach of the trapped leg. The smell of wild animal, musky and primal, filled his nostrils. He could feel the heat radiating from the wolf's body. "I'm going to touch you now," he warned, reaching slowly for the entangled leg. The wolf flinched, but didn't snap or growl. With trembling hands, Daniel began carefully cutting the barbed wire, working methodically to avoid causing additional pain. Each snip of the cutters made the wolf twitch, but it remained eerily cooperative, as if understanding Daniel's intent. As the last strand of wire fell away, Daniel expected the wolf to leap up and flee, or attack. Instead, it remained still, looking from its freed leg to Daniel with what seemed like calculation. Daniel shuffled backward, giving the animal space. "You're free now," he said. "Go on." The wolf rose shakily to its feet, tentatively testing weight on the injured leg. Blood began flowing more freely from the puncture wounds now that the constricting wire was gone. It took a few halting steps, then stopped, looking back at Daniel. "Go," Daniel urged. "Your pack needs you." As if understanding, the wolf turned and limped slowly toward the tree line. At the edge of the forest, it paused, looking back once more. Daniel could have sworn something passed between them in that moment, some acknowledgement beyond the normal boundaries of human and wild. Then the wolf was gone, melting into the shadows between the trees. Daniel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. He gathered the cruel wire, intent on turning it over to rangers as evidence of poaching, and collected his gear with shaking hands. The encounter had lasted less than 30 minutes, but Daniel knew something profound had occurred. He had touched the essence of wildness and found it more complex than he'd ever imagined. As he hiked back toward his truck, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Something about the wolf's final look, that lingering gaze before it disappeared, suggested a significance beyond a simple rescue. What Daniel couldn't possibly know as he drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the Montana mountains in shades of gold and purple, was that his act of compassion had set in motion events that would challenge everything wildlife experts thought they knew about wolf behavior, and would soon transform his own life in ways he could never have anticipated. 3 weeks passed, and the encounter with the trapped wolf began to take on the quality of a dream in Daniel's mind. He mentioned it to no one, not even the park rangers. Something about the experience felt too personal, too sacred to share. Besides, admitting he had approached and touched a wild wolf would only earn him lectures about safety protocols and interference with wildlife. Winter descended on the mountains with characteristic ferocity. Two major snowstorms buried Daniel's cabin under 3 feet of snow, isolating him further from the already distant town. He didn't mind the solitude. It was why he'd chosen this life, after all. But the bitter cold limited his photography expeditions. On this particular morning, Daniel woke before dawn as usual. After stoking the wood stove back to life, he brewed coffee and stood at his kitchen window, watching the darkness slowly yield to gray winter light. That's when he saw them. Shadowy forms moving at the edge of the clearing around his cabin. At first, he thought they were deer, common visitors during harsh winters, but as visibility improved, his coffee mug nearly slipped from his fingers. Wolves. 5 of them moving with deliberate caution around the perimeter of his property. Daniel recognized their behavior immediately from years of observation. This was a hunting formation, except they weren't tracking game. They appeared to be examining his cabin, his territory. At the center of the pack was a large, gray wolf with distinctive silver markings around its muzzle. Even from a distance, Daniel recognized him. The wolf he had freed from the barbed wire. Its injured leg appeared healed, though it favored it slightly when walking. Impossible, Daniel whispered, reaching for his camera. While wolves occasionally ventured near human habitations when desperate for food, this behavior was different. They weren't scavenging or displaying the furtive movements of hunger-driven desperation. They moved with purpose, and Daniel couldn't shake the impression they were studying his cabin, his routines. For 3 consecutive mornings, the wolves returned at dawn. Each day, they maintained their distance, never approaching the cabin directly, but making their presence known through tracks in the snow and occasional howls that echoed across the valley at dusk. On the 4th morning, Daniel discovered something that sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Outside his front door lay a freshly killed rabbit, placed with what appeared to be deliberate care on his welcome mat. "This can't be happening," he muttered, examining the untouched carcass. Wildlife experts would dismiss the idea immediately, but Daniel couldn't deny the evidence before him. The rabbit had not been partially consumed and abandoned. It had been delivered, intact, to his doorstep, like a gift. That evening, as darkness descended on the mountains, Daniel made a decision that flew in the face of conventional wisdom. He placed a cut of venison from his freezer on a flat rock at the edge of his clearing, then retreated to his cabin. Through his window, camera ready, he waited. At dusk, the wolf pack materialized from the tree line. The silver-muzzled leader approached the meat cautiously, sniffed it, then looked directly toward Daniel's window. For a breathtaking moment, wolf and man locked eyes across the expanse of snow. Then, in a gesture that defied explanation, the wolf lowered its head in what appeared to be a nod before taking the offering. The pack melted back into the forest, leaving Daniel standing at his window, camera forgotten in his hands, wrestling with implications that challenged everything science claimed about wolf cognition and behavior. 2 days later, Daniel received a call from Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife biologist he'd occasionally supplied with photographs for her research. "Daniel, are you tracking the Aspen Creek pack?" she asked without preamble. "Their movement patterns have completely changed, and they've established a new territory that practically circles your cabin. I've never seen anything like it." Daniel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I've noticed them around," he said carefully. "Well, something's altered their behavior significantly," Elena continued. "I'd like to set up some cameras near your property, if you don't mind. This could be important data." As Daniel agreed to Elena's request, he wondered how she would react if he told her the truth, that he believed the wolves were not just circling his property by coincidence, but had deliberately established a connection with him, that they were, in some inexplicable way, acknowledging what he had done for one of their own. Such a claim would be dismissed as anthropomorphizing, projecting human emotions and intentions onto wild animals. Yet, as Daniel ended the call and looked out at the fresh wolf tracks in the snow leading to and from his cabin, He couldn't deny the evidence of his own experience. What was unfolding here was something science had not yet found the language to describe, a relationship between species that transcended the traditional boundaries of wild and human. And it was only beginning. By mid-January, Daniel's life had transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. The wolf pack had become a regular presence around his cabin, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly establishing what biologists would call a territory overlap with his property. The silver-muzzled wolf, whom Daniel had begun to think of as Silas, served as an apparent intermediary between pack and human. Twice more small game appeared at Daniel's doorstep. In return, Daniel occasionally left meat at the edge of his clearing, careful never to make the wolves dependent on his offerings. These exchanges weren't about feeding. They seemed more like a ritual of mutual acknowledgement. Dr. Elena Vasquez had indeed set up research cameras around Daniel's property, and the footage they captured was causing a stir in the wildlife biology community. The behavioral patterns are unprecedented, Elena told him during one of her visits to check the equipment. They're treating your cabin as part of their territory, but not as a threat. It's as if they've categorized you as, well, not exactly pack, but not an intruder either. Daniel nodded non-committally, still reluctant to share the full story of his encounter with Silas, but Elena was too observant to be fooled for long. This began with the injured wolf, didn't it? She asked suddenly, fixing Daniel with a penetrating look. The one with the healed leg injury that matches ranger reports of a wolf caught in poacher's wire back in November. The rangers never found it, but suddenly it's here, leading a pack that's exhibiting behavior we've never documented before. Daniel sighed, knowing it was time for truth. I freed him, he admitted, bracing for her professional condemnation. The rangers were hours away, and he would have died. To his surprise, Elena didn't immediately lecture him on protocol violations. Instead, she considered this information with thoughtful silence. You know, this is going to upend some fundamental assumptions about wolf cognition if we can document it properly, she said finally. The capacity to recognize individual humans as benefactors rather than threats, to apparently communicate that recognition to other pack members, to establish what appears to be a deliberate relationship of mutual respect. I know it sounds impossible, Daniel began. Not impossible, Elena corrected. Just previously undocumented at this level of complexity. Indigenous knowledge systems have included stories of reciprocal relationships with wolves for centuries, but modern wildlife science has been skeptical without empirical evidence. Over the following weeks, Elena's cameras captured increasingly remarkable behavior. The wolves began to use Daniel's property as a safe corridor during their hunts, moving through his clearing with a comfort that contradicted everything known about wolf avoidance of human dwellings. Occasionally, when Daniel was outside chopping wood or maintaining his equipment, Silas would appear at the forest edge, watching but never approaching too closely, maintaining what Elena called a respectful mutual boundary. One snowy afternoon, everything changed again. Daniel was photographing winter birds from his porch when the sound of gunshots echoed across the valley, 3 in rapid succession, coming from an area where hunting was strictly prohibited. Poachers. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed his jacket and headed toward the sound. Halfway through the forest, he encountered Silas and 2 other wolves moving in the same direction, their posture alert and purposeful. In that moment, something unspoken passed between man and wolf. They were responding to the same threat, moving with the same intent. Daniel adjusted his course slightly to parallel the wolves' path, maintaining a distance of about 30 yards. What they found in a clearing 2 miles from Daniel's cabin would make headlines across the country and force wildlife biologists to reconsider long-held beliefs about the relationship between humans and one of North America's most misunderstood predators. The scene in the clearing told a disturbing story. 2 men stood over the body of a young elk cow, illegal rifles in hand. Their truck was partially hidden among the trees, its bed already containing what appeared to be other poached game. They were field dressing the elk, laughing and talking, oblivious to Daniel's approach through the dense undergrowth. Daniel reached for his satellite phone to alert the authorities, but before he could dial, a low growl from nearby made him freeze. 15 yards to his right, Silas and 5 other wolves had emerged from the forest. Their posture was unlike anything Daniel had seen in his years of observation. Hackles raised, heads low, a unified front of predatory intent focused entirely on the poachers. The men noticed the wolves at the same moment, their conversation cutting off mid-sentence. One raised his rifle instinctively. "Don't!" Daniel shouted, revealing his position. "Lower your weapon slowly." The man's head whipped toward Daniel's voice, his expression a mixture of surprise and anger at being discovered. "Mind your own business," he snarled. "Unless you want to be next." "You're on protected land," Daniel replied, emerging cautiously from the trees, camera in hand. "I've already photographed you and your license plates. The Rangers are on their way." This last part was a bluff. He hadn't yet called them, but the men didn't know that. What happened next would later be described by Elena as coordinated response behavior previously undocumented in wolf-human interactions. As if sensing the escalating tension, the wolves began to move, not directly toward the poachers, but in a precise circular pattern around the clearing, effectively cutting off the men's path to their truck. They made no move to attack, but their message was unmistakable. No one was leaving. "Call them off," the second poacher demanded, his voice rising in panic. "They're wild wolves," Daniel answered truthfully. "I don't control them." Yet, even as he said it, Daniel understood something profound was happening. The wolves weren't acting on his command, but they were acting in concert with his presence, responding to the same threat, creating a united front against those who violated the sanctity of their shared territory. For nearly 40 minutes, this tense standoff continued. The wolves maintained their perimeter, occasionally shifting positions but never breaking their circle. Daniel kept his distance, satellite phone now in hand, having quietly called in the Rangers. When the authorities finally arrived, they were met with an astonishing tableau. 2 armed poachers standing rigidly by their illegal kill, surrounded by a disciplined circle of wolves that parted just enough to allow the Rangers' vehicles to enter, then closed ranks again. "I've never seen anything like it," Ranger Michael Blackwood would later state in his official report. The wolves were clearly containing the suspects, but made no aggressive moves toward them. "When we took the poachers into custody, the animals retreated to the tree line but remained visible, as if ensuring we completed our task." The incident made national news, with headlines ranging from sensational "Wolfpack deputies make citizens arrest" to more measured scientific interest. Unprecedented cooperative behavior observed between human and apex predator. For Daniel, however, the significance went beyond headlines. As the Rangers departed with the handcuffed poachers, Silas had approached closer than ever before, stopping just 10 yards from where Daniel stood. Their eyes met in a moment of connection that transcended species boundaries. Then the wolf turned and rejoined his pack, disappearing into the forest that was their shared home. That evening, as snow began to fall again across the mountains, Daniel sat on his porch despite the cold, contemplating the day's events. The soft sound of paws on snow made him look up. At the edge of his clearing stood the entire pack, 7 wolves in a perfect line, with Silas at their center. For a breathless moment, they stood in silent communion. Then, as one, they raised their voices in a howl that echoed across the valley. Not the mournful call often described in literature, but something that struck Daniel as triumphant, almost celebratory. He understood then that something unprecedented had formed. Not domestication, not taming, but a mutual respect between species who had recognized in each other not just the capacity for destruction that had long defined their relationship, but the shared desire to protect what both held sacred. Spring arrived in the mountains, melting the snow and revealing the first green shoots of new life. 6 months had passed since Daniel freed Silas from the barbed wire, and the relationship between photographer and wolfpack had evolved in ways that continued to astonish the scientific community. Dr. Elena Vasquez had published her preliminary findings in a respected wildlife journal, sparking intense debate. Critics accused her of anthropomorphizing, of misinterpreting coincidental behavior, yet the evidence captured by her cameras told a compelling story of cross-species recognition and cooperation that couldn't be easily dismissed. We need to reconsider some of our fundamental assumptions about animal cognition, Elena argued during a symposium that drew researchers from across the country to the small Montana university where she taught. What we're observing isn't just habituation or opportunistic behavior. There appears to be genuine recognition, memory, and reciprocity at work. Daniel had reluctantly become something of a celebrity in wildlife conservation circles, though he turned down most interview requests and speaking invitations. His photographs of the Aspen Creek pack, particularly of Silas, captured not just the physical beauty of the wolves, but something deeper, a sentience and complexity that challenged viewers to see these animals as more than simply wild predators. As for the wolves themselves, their behavior continued to defy conventional understanding. They maintained their territory overlap with Daniel's property, but showed no signs of unhealthy habituation to human presence. When research teams or Forest Service personnel visited, the pack remained invisible, materializing only when Daniel was alone or accompanied by Elena, whom they seemed to have accepted by extension. On a warm May morning, Daniel was photographing wildflowers near a stream on his property when he sensed, rather than heard, a presence behind him. Turning slowly, he found Silas standing just 20 feet away, closer than the wolf had ever approached before. "Hello, old friend," Daniel said softly, lowering his camera. The wolf regarded him with those intelligent amber eyes that had haunted Daniel's dreams since their first encounter. Beside Silas stood a smaller female wolf, her belly swollen with pregnancy. Daniel remained perfectly still as Silas took several more steps forward, closing the distance between them to just 10 feet. The female wolf, his mate, hung back, watchful but not fearful. For several heartbeats, wolf and man regarded each other in silence. Then Silas did something that would forever remain imprinted in Daniel's memory. The great wolf lowered himself to the ground, belly against the earth, chin resting on his front paws, the most vulnerable posture a wolf could assume. The message was unmistakable, trust freely given. After a moment, Silas rose and rejoined his mate. Together, they melted back into the forest, leaving Daniel standing by the stream with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. 2 weeks later, Elena's cameras captured footage that would eventually be seen by millions around the world. Silas and his mate, leading 4 tiny wolf pups to the edge of Daniel's clearing at dawn. The adult wolves sat while the curious pups tumbled and played in full view of the cabin, under the watchful eyes of their parents. "They're introducing their offspring to you," Elena said in wonder when she reviewed the footage. "They're teaching the pups that your presence is safe, part of their known world." As months passed, this extraordinary relationship continued to yield new insights into wolf behavior and cognition. The Aspen Creek territory became a living laboratory for a new approach to wildlife research, one based on respect and coexistence rather than distant observation. Daniel never attempted to interact directly with the wolf pups as they grew, understanding that maintaining the wild integrity of the pack was essential. Yet he was permitted glimpses into their lives that few humans had ever witnessed. Pack members teaching hunting skills to the young, complex social interactions, moments of play and discipline that revealed the rich emotional lives of these animals. The story of the photographer and the wolves he had befriended spread, inspiring new conservation efforts and challenging long-held prejudices against these essential predators. Old ranchers who had once viewed wolves as nothing but vermin to be eliminated began to reconsider, especially after seeing how the Aspen Creek pack actually reduced elk overpopulation and improved the health of the entire ecosystem. 1 year to the day after Daniel freed Silas from the barbed wire, he hiked to a ridge overlooking the valley they both called home. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, a familiar howl echoed across the landscape, soon joined by others, the voices of the pack rising in harmony. Daniel smiled, understanding what his scientific colleagues were still struggling to articulate in their research papers. What had formed between him and these wild creatures wasn't simply habituation or conditioning or mutual advantage. It was something older and deeper, a recognition across the species divide that we are more alike than different, capable of extending trust where fear once ruled. As darkness settled over the mountains and the wolf song continued to fill the night, Daniel knew he had been granted something precious beyond measure. Not just extraordinary photographs or scientific breakthroughs, but a glimpse into another way of being, another way of understanding our place within the web of life that sustains us all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories about the incredible connections possible between humans and wildlife. Help us spread the message that with respect and compassion, we can bridge even the wildest divides.